trying to join, and he should join us momentarily, I hope. And so at present we have the meeting going, and the first item of business is the call the meeting to order, and then any pecuniary or conflict of interest declarations. I don't see anybody indicating, so Lana will so note that there's no conflict of interest. And then for the agenda, just wanted to add one item into closed session, an update from the cemetery discussion that we had on the last meeting on November 23rd. So that closed session. And with that, I'll call for a motion or any more additions to the agenda, or a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Councillor Lloyd moves the agenda as amended. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, so I see that Doreen, Bill, Brianne, Roger, Jason, and myself are all in favor, so we'll consider that unanimously passed. And then we'll go into our first item of business, the public hearing on the land use rezoning bylaw. And I'll let Spencer Coaldale there to introduce. There he is. And there you go, Spencer. You can introduce the bylaw, please. And I'll open the public hearing.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Just as a matter of process, can everybody hear me? Excellent. Okay, well, thank you, Mayor, and good evening to you and Council. As you mentioned, this is a public hearing for land use rezoning bylaw 7994P-12-20. An application has been made on the subject property to rezone from the current zoning of residential R1A to commercial C1. And just as a point of reference, if Lana, you could put up Schedule A of the bylaw itself, that'll show a map that allows us to see where exactly this parcel of land is. So the application has been made with the idea to have a counseling service, a health-related counseling service run out of the property. And as was discussed in the first reading when that was presented December 14th to Council, the reason that the property is being proposed to go to commercial versus just having it listed as a home-based business or a home occupation is because the proponents for the application would like to have no residential component to the business and just be able to run the business as a standalone use out of the home that's currently on the property. In terms of key considerations, of course, there needs to be recognition that this particular property is adjacent to residential development to the south, or residential neighborhood to the south, and in the future, what would end up being phase 3 of the Civic Square project would be to the immediate north of this subject property. So sensitivity should be shown to the residentially zoned properties to the south. And in this case, it's worth highlighting that there are a certain number of sections or regulatory components of our land use bylaw that do require additional landscaping and other physical components to allow for commercial property to be successful directly adjacent to residential property. So that need for sensitivity between the types of zonings being able to coexist, as it were, is reflected in the bylaw as written. In terms of stakeholder engagement, the public hearing or the advertising for the public hearing was run in the January 5th and 12th, 2021 editions of the Sunny South newspaper, and area residents and area property owners surrounding the subject property were also notified by way of mail. As of this evening, there's been no indication that anybody would like to speak at the public hearing, and there were no questions fielded prior to the public hearing. In terms of decision options, of course, as is always the case with rezonings, Council may wish to, subsequent to any further discussion at the hearing, consider second and third reading of the bylaw as written or with amendments. That brings my comments on this matter to a close, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Spencer, and I'll open it up to Council for any questions they might have. Does anybody on council have any questions for the dispenser? Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Worship. Through to Spencer. So just for clarity, then the rezoning of that one parcel is almost a standalone then to the north. Maybe just refresh my mind again as to what the zoning is for that.
Benign, I would guess, on, because it's a counseling business, but you know, what other uses could that property be used for under the current land use bylaw, commercial C1 zoning, should the owner sell in the future?
Certainly, thank you for the question, Mayor. Essentially, it's any other use that can exist in the Main Street area as a discretionary or permitted use. So it's anything from retail to office space to banks to personal services such as massage therapy or things related to that. That is one of the reasons that I called attention to the fact that there is allowances for, in the land use bylaw, a need for physical barriers and other ways to manage that transition from commercial to residential uses because of that residential component directly south of the property in question.
So then how would that be communicated when the business license is granted to the, you know, if this bylaw passes, and that would, you know, those steps of mitigation be implemented right away?
Again, thank you for the question, Mayor. That's an excellent question. And the answer to that is that as a part of the change of use permit that would be required once the assuming that a rezoning were to be successful in this case, if that were to be the case, then as a part of the development permit application process, the regulations in the land use bylaw would be as required at that point in time. So we would be able to help the applicant along with exactly what it is that they may need to do in terms of transitioning from that commercial to residential component before they end up starting the business.
Okay, thank you, Spencer. Are there any other questions of council to administration? Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Spencer again. Could you just clarify with council what types of landscaping controls you might be implementing for that kind of a zoning?
Certainly. So through the chair to Councillor Chapman, I just need a moment to pull up my digital version of my land use bylaw, and I can actually provide a little bit more specific commentary as to what that would look like. Typically, it's going to be components of landscaping such as screening with certain types of vegetation that would have a more of a vertical growth pattern than branching out, as it were. And if there was enough potential impact from the commercial to residential use, then there can be other components added, screening that isn't just vegetation, something such as a privacy wall or something of that nature. But certainly if you'd like more specifics, I can take a moment and just get to that part of the bylaw.
I think that, do you have anything more for more specifics, Councilor Chapman, or is that adequate? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I don't see anybody coming online to, or waving, making indication of any more questions. So, and Spencer, you I said earlier that there was nobody that contacted you that wished to speak either for or against the application, and is that still the case?
Yes, that's correct, Mayor.
And council, if you could wave your hand if you have any more questions, otherwise I'll assume that there's no more questions and we can proceed to closing the public hearing. Okay, I don't see any, and welcome Councillor Pauls. I'm taking it that everybody has sufficient information to make a decision on this matter, so I will close the public hearing at this time then, and we'll move along. Then the next item on the agenda is 3.1. We have regular council meeting minutes of December 14th, 2020. Are there any errors or omissions or additions, deletions that anybody cares to draw to our attention? Councillor Holm?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe on 12.1, I believe that there was one against that motion. I believe Doreen was against that motion. Sorry, Councillor Lloyd was against the motion.
Okay, does that reflect your recollection, Councillor Lloyd? You were on mute, but give me a thumbs up if you're okay with Councillor Holmes' addition. All right.
You're right, I can't find it right now, so.
So it's okay to reflect that you were opposed then?
I have to check it first. I can't find it right. Just a minute. Okay, here we go. 12.1. Okay, yeah, I think I was.
Okay. All right, well, the minutes will reflect that amendment, and if there's no other amendments or suggestions, then could somebody please make a motion to adopt the amendments as amended? Councillor Simpson moves. All in favor? Any opposed? There are no opposed, so Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls are all in favor. That's unanimous. We'll go to 4.1, request for decision on land matter. And Kaylin has a report included in the package. And do you have any other comments, CAO Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Everything that I wanted to say is laid out in the report. I think at this stage, the history of the property, including stemming back to council discussions in 2015, that's laid out in the staff report. What we need as an administration is direction from council on where to go from here with the property. So if what I'd like to do is just open up the floor to council for discussion so that we can, at the conclusion of that discussion, have clear direction as staff on how to proceed with it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lloyd.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I would make a motion to go with option 1, that council would retain ownership of the property and fund the expense of the said ownership as follows. Land sale purchase for $252, and the cost of demolition be coded to the town cemetery reserve account.
Okay, we have the motion by Councillor Lloyd. Any other discussion? Councillor Avery?
Thank you, Worship. Speaking against the motion, I don't feel that we're in a position right now with the town or as council to be putting any more money into that piece of land. And I would rather see us put it up for sale and try and get our expenses back from that piece. Thank you.
Councillor Home?
Your worship, also speaking against the motion, I guess one question that does come to mind, did we ever have any contract verbally or anything else with this group that was going to be purchasing the land from the town when we bought it back in February or March of last year? I just want to know if we have any recourse on that group, because that would be my first direction, would be try and get the money out of the group that we purchased the property for. And if not, then I would certainly be in favor of selling the property as quickly as we can and try and recoup whatever losses we can off of this.
Okay, I think the staff report pretty much touches on the fact that there was a informal group set up, so there was no legal entity that was formulated to actually purchase land at the time that council considered the potential project. It was more of the initial stages of a project coming together that had a lot of promise and hope to it, especially because it was right in the early new year of last year. And then within, weeks after that, then the pandemic got its grip on things, and the ability for that group to generate any more interest in coming together and making that project the reality evaporated more or less. And so to answer your question, there's no legal entity that we have a verbal or written agreement with to that end. Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. So it's right now it's zoned for residential, correct? And also with that, if it's the location it shouldn't be zoned for residential. So I think us selling it, of course, it would become another residence. I don't think that area is meant for that anymore. I do like the area. It does need to be cleaned up. So I do like that area of demolition. I'm okay putting the land, purchasing it as the motion and demolition, and then we can decide what we would do further with that land, whether we would sell it, but I would rezone it before we would sell it.
Well, and I would speak in favor of the motion in the essence that, it is certainly sad that the reality of the project that was a vision couldn't come together, because it was truly exciting in that, but that's what happens when the economy and the world takes a turn like it did with COVID and that. And but we have acquired the property, and it was sort of a strategic purpose. And I believe the fact that being able to have a real thorough thought process on what we do with it going forward, now that we do have it, makes a lot of sense, as opposed to flipping it and not knowing exactly how that that's a fairly key piece, a gateway and corridor property for Coaldale. So I'm in support of it, and I recognize that it was unfortunate that it didn't come to fruition, and that would have been awesome, but that's the way life goes. And that. Councillor Lloyd? Okay. And Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think in the report I read that a resolution was made in 2015, and maybe just as a sort of a precursor to that date, that I think the museum board and others were looking at acquiring that piece of property for future purposes. So I think we're at a prime spot or a stage right now with that property.
Councillor Holm?
Thank you, Worship. Through to Councillor Chapman, you are correct that this did come up in 2015. And if you remember correctly, sitting at the table, that there was a great deal of discussion about that. And council at the time said, if we spent more than $180,000 for a piece of land that we'd have to demolish, we paid too much for it because we had no real use for it. It was basically in the edge of the industrial park and would be probably zoned as industrial. So the only thing that we could really do with it is probably make it into a parking lot, which at the time council suggested was way too much money for a parking lot. So I don't believe that referring back to 2015, remember it was turned down 3 times before that.
Councillor Avery?
Thank you, Worship. And again, I'm just wondering, we're taking money out of our capital accounts for this project. I thought it was made pretty clear when we're doing budget deliberations, we shouldn't be doing this because you're just robbing from one account for something else. So we don't know the cost of demolition. We're into it for $252 already. Demolition, probably $80,000 to $100,000 by the time you get rid of the asbestos and other contaminants within that property. So now we're at $350,000 approximately. Again, we're looking at trying to save money. We're taking from the cemetery fund. We know this will never be part of the cemetery. I agree it's part of the gateway and corridor, but let's let investors invest in our community. We shouldn't always be thinking it's got to be us. We're investing a lot in our main street. Now, if we start investing down Highway 845, then it's going to be down Highway 3. So I really think we need to be careful with how much we want to spend. This is an unbudgeted pressure already in our first meeting of 2021. So we've got to be careful if we start approving extra costs every budget meeting. So, we're $100,000 over budget without raising our taxes. We're going to have to really watch on how we're spending.
So Kaylin, when you, in your report, you earmarked money for the capital costs that come out of the land reserve for industrial sales, that, can you clarify how the transactions in that have worked since the time that we did the capital budget and now then?
Sure, Mr. Mayor. The land sale reserve account that's primarily funded through sales from the Northeast Industrial Park. In the last 2 months, there's probably been around 10 sales in that account. So we've actually been doing quite well from a sales perspective in the industrial park. So that's good news. The one thing that in part of the recommendation that was made, having a piece of land, hang on to it until you can think through long-term what you want to do with that area. Then you still have the option to sell it. I hope it doesn't come across like it's a rush. My one caution is not to rush to make a decision one way or another until after the long-term framework for the area can be considered. Pieces of property like this are difficult to acquire. So if council rushes into selling it, for instance, you don't know what long-term potential you're saying no to through that sale. Similarly, if council rushes into saying they want to keep it, you also don't know what long-term commitment you're locking yourselves into. But we are at the end of our fiscal year end. We do need to code this and assign it appropriately. In addition, I do think a long-term planning for that area needs to be made before council makes a long-term decision one way or another on what to do with that parcel.
Another option would be that we could actually, just code the purchase and get the accounting right and then bring it back to council at a later date to talk about, you know, if we wanted to put more money into demolition or whatever, that could be another option. Councilor Avery indicated he wanted to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. And I was basically going to speak along those same lines. So why are our options have demolition and demolition? Why don't we just worry about coding where the costs that we've already concurred within our budget from 2020, and then we can look at in the future, what do we want to do with this piece of land?
Okay, Councilor Simpson, and we do have a motion on the floor, so, but Councilor Simpson, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. The one concern I have about not doing the demolition is we will have to rezone that property as residential is not suited well there. And that's, I get a lot of complaints about that property of how it looks and how it is. So I think demolition to clean up the area. And then you can always put the cost of the demolition into the cost of the sale if we decide to sell the property. So it's easier for somebody to work from a blank page than to try to figure out how that building could incorporate into them, and then or them worry about demolition too.
Okay, Councilor Lloyd, you sponsored the motion. Do you want the motion to stand the way it is, or do you want to keep it on the table or amend it?
I think it's good the way it is.
Okay. And I'll give one final option for anybody to speak for or against. Okay, so at this time, we have Councilor Lloyd sponsors the motion. Option number one, which would include coding the purchase as recommended, and also putting a budget in place of 50,000 for demolition to come from the cemetery reserve. Last chance for any comments. Okay, and I'll call the question. All in favor? All right. So we have Councilor Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, and Pauls, I believe. Was that you up? Yeah. And then opposed? Councilor Holm and Councilor Avery are opposed, so that's carried. 5-2. Thank you very much. Okay, and then we'll go to item 6.1. We'll bring back the land use rezoning bylaw, and we'll let Spencer introduce that item of business again.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I don't have any other comments beyond what was discussed during the public hearing. Again, happy to answer any final questions before consideration of vote on the bylaw. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So council, any comments or questions of administration? Okay, I don't see any. Does anybody want to sponsor second reading then? Councilor Simpson indicates that she would like to sponsor second reading. Any discussion? I see none. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, so okay. That's all in favor then. Is any opposed? There was no opposed. So that's Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls all in favor. So that's unanimous. I can entertain third reading. Councilor Chapman supports third reading. Any discussion? I see none, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that's unanimous. All in favor. Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls are all in favor. Thank you very much. Then we are moving on to 6.2, the records retention and disposition bylaw. And I imagine Lana would like to speak to that. Lana, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. This records retention and disposition bylaw I'm presenting is a follow-up to our process of the information management policy that was approved by council in September. Since March, we've been working with a records management consultant, getting our records in order, as well as looking forward to our next steps now with the passing of the bylaw, which will be a formal process of how we collect, use, and dispose of our information. Included with the actual bylaw is a taxonomy, which explains in great detail of how we are going to organize all of our information moving forward, not only in electronic format, but also in our paper as well. So this bylaw is just the next formal step in that process. And after the bylaw is passed and approved, our next step is actually implementation of agenda software. So this is a project, again, we've been working on since March, and it's just the formal clipping along here. So unless council has any other questions, I think everything is in the staff report.
Yes, compliments on a very thorough and comprehensive report, and it looks like a lot of time and effort went into that, and very thorough from my perspective.
Thank you.
Would there be any budget implications on implementing this, or is it pretty much, do we have all the ability to implement it and do it as outlined in the bylaw, Alana, without any major expenses?
We don't have any expense right now. There was a $40,000 cost, which was approved for our agenda, the records management software, which will be the actual implementation. It gives us the capability of being able to track and, scan all of our documents, track documents even by word association, like any word in a document, as well as how we collect, organize, and then it will also have a retention schedules attached to that as well. So that was approved with the operational side of the 2021 budget.
Okay, thank you, Lana. Any other questions through the Lana? I don't see any. Oh, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Through to Lana, is just a quick question about electronic versus hard copy and whether they're both treated equally.
Yes, so there are some documents like our minutes and bylaws, which do require a paper copy or a microfilm, which we don't have. So there are certain things that according to MGA and legal requirements that we do require of paper copies as well. So those will never go away.
All right. I don't see any other questions through to Lana, so unless there are any, I'd entertain a motion to sponsor first reading of the bylaw. Councillor Pauls moves first reading of the bylaw. Any discussion? I see none. I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Councillor Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls are in favor. We can entertain second reading if that's your wish. Councillor Simpson moves second reading. Any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Okay, and I see 7 hands in favor. That's Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls. Then we could entertain a motion for unanimous consent for all 3 readings in one evening, if that's your desire. Councillor Lloyd moves for unanimous consent. All in favor? And that's received unanimous consent by Pauls, Avery, Holm, Simpson, Chapman, Craig, and Lloyd. And we would be in a position to entertain third and final reading. Councillor Chapman moves. All in favor? Okay, and that's 7 hands in favor. So Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls. Thank you very much, Lana.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have new business, 7.1, we have the Arena Enhancement Working Group, proposed terms of reference, Russ Tanner and or Spencer Coyle. Who's gonna open this up?
I'll take first position here with opening the item and presenting a bit of an overview to council, and then I'll hand it off to Russ for some more specific commentary around certain components of the group and the document itself.
Great, thanks.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So as council is likely aware, this is very similar to the document that was the terms of reference that was created for the Sport and Rec Working Group, terms of reference, the Town Plan Working Group, I believe had terms of reference as well. And really the documents are helpful because they represent a touchstone that captures the membership, the scope and objectives of the group itself, and a timeline. It also helps to identify how communication will be carried out and any potential need for consideration of budgetary items, things of that nature. So really it does provide a bit of a map or a mapping out of how a particular group is going to go about their business. In this particular case, the working group themselves worked to, if we could go to page 114 of the agenda, which should be page 2 of the document itself. The working group essentially used the town staff as facilitators to help develop the terms of reference, and specifically some of the more critical components of the document itself. So on page 115, I'm not sure if council sees that yet or not, but that page in particular, that would be page 3 of the terms of reference, that contains the group's vision, principles, and scope. And those 3 pieces effectively map out the entire document. Those 3 pieces were developed in conjunction, close conjunction with the working group. And again, I just want to mention that the town staff really just acted as facilitators for the discussions that ended up with these particular aspects of the terms of reference being developed. I did want to point out before we get too much further on that the vision reads that a arena that is upgraded substantially in 2022. And as I noted in my staff report, that's a form of facilitated discussion that's called appreciative inquiry. So basically it's the most ideal future that you could imagine. It's not necessarily rooted in realistic timelines, but it's something that if we just imagine the best possible outcome, that's what would have come of the work the group has taken on thus far. So I wouldn't want to mislead anyone and think that there's a proposal in place that we substantially upgrade the arena by 2022. So that's just for getting ideas together and getting the group focused on one singular push to an ideal future with the arena. The principles are fairly standard, to be honest, in terms of what the goals are. So I won't go through those one by one, but I did want to mention before passing it off to Russ that one of the, if we could go to page, kind of between page 3 and 4 of the item itself, so page 115 and 116 of the agenda item, it shows the scope. And the scope includes 3 items that are fairly standard in this case. So we're preparing a guiding document, obtaining preliminary design options for a second sheet of ice, and preparing a business and operating plan that demonstrates how the enhanced facility could work in reality. Those 3 items were touched upon by the minor hockey representatives who made the request back in February of 2020 to have this working group start up. The 4th item is something that I'd like to call council's attention to, and I would like to note that the working group members themselves came up with the idea that it would be fantastic to have an arena, an updated arena with a second sheet of ice and all the bells and whistles, but that can't be a discussion in isolation. So the group actually thought it would make sense to tie together at some future point the discussion around the arena enhancements that are desired and aquatics enhancements that are desired, because it's difficult to have one discussion about one and one discussion about the other without recognizing there needs to be consideration of the costs and benefits of both facilities. And I did want to mention again that that was an idea that was captured by the group members themselves. So in helping to facilitate that idea, that's been added to the terms of reference. And as council will recall, staff was supposed to undertake substantial engagement around the aquatics facilities discussions with the community last summer. Now that was delayed because of the impacts on timelines and other things that COVID has had over time. And so this could be a bit of a silver lining in the sense that the timelines could match up quite well if we do continue to have good working discussions with the arena enhancement working group. It should naturally lead into a timeline where we can start to have discussions about the aquatics facilities in the spring and summer of 2021, which was the desired timeline that was suggested to staff in May 25th of 2020. And that particular idea is captured on page 6 of the terms of reference, or page 118 of the agenda. So it talks about the idea of pairing public participation process for the pool engagement with the last steps of coming together as a working group focused on arena enhancement. So it'll help create a more comprehensive discussion around both facilities. With that, I will mention that we've had a number of successful meetings, and in terms of specifics and the specific benefits of the meetings we've had with the working group so far, I think it would be best if Russ could speak to that. So at this point in time, I'd like to hand things off to him for the rest of the item. Thank you very much.
All right, and Spencer, thanks for setting that up. And Spencer really shared a ton of information that I'll just echo as well and add a few more things to it. Certainly, I've been impressed with the working group. The last 2 meetings I was able to attend. They're very capable. They're people that are very involved within the ICE user groups of the community. They're passionate for it, and their vision for the future is great because they're a part of what that will be. So some of the things that we've dealt with is as staff, we've provided some of the statistics and asked for statistics from each group to try to gain a pulse and an idea, really a clear idea of how their programs are doing today and what those programs would look like if a second sheet of ice were added without committing to a timeline, but in the future. And they've provided us a ton of information. I've been pretty darn impressed with the use of ice currently. The primetime use is pretty much 100% used. Impressed with how late we go into the evening. Our proximity to Lethbridge probably helps out with some of the older senior leagues and things. Having said that, senior leagues are always looking for a little bit earlier times. And so when a second sheet of ice is used, some of the things that they have talked about is that as you grow into that space with the existing user groups, which currently right now, the user groups, there is really very little movement to grow figure skating and the minor hockey program. And even in this case, currently the junior B hockey club is using not the most ideal ice times, but they're making it work and have been a big part of making sure the ice is getting used. In the future, they're wanting to grow their programs. And as they grow into that, the opportunity to actually use some of that, our local connections with the adult leagues and things like that would help that, because as at first, as times are a little bit earlier, you're going to fill those times rather than starting at programs at 10 o'clock at night. You'd be looking at the possibility of 8:30 and a little bit earlier, and that would be growth, is my understanding. So without getting into too many details on what their programs are looking for, some of the additional programs they'd be looking at a future time would be a hockey academy. To kind of give you a little bit of background on that, a hockey academy right now, it may not seem like a whole bunch when they'd be requesting in order to have one, maybe 3 weekends in the year, the primetime ice, and then be using, for the most part, the non-primetime ice during the day. It's a really good fit with the community. Unfortunately, right now, there isn't 3 weekends in a year that minor hockey and figure skating and stuff can really give up. And so that's kind of a little bit of a window into some of the discussion they've had. And then Spencer really set up the aspect. So besides that data and the use and what a second ice sheet would look like, we have done some very preliminary, just some ideas of what a second sheet would actually look like physically at the current location, understanding we have some barriers to get around. For instance, where the ice plant is situated, makes it difficult for a lobby, a joint lobby, which creates other efficiencies on staffing and security and things like that. Makes it difficult because you can't encompass that ice. So we're looking at the east side of the facility as a possibility, but as you bring in the discussion with aquatics with the same group, it also helps paint the picture that at the current location, whether or not the current location works for both to be developed for the future. And there's certainly an idea this group has come up with that would see a lobby brought more to the south side of that building and parking lot out the south side, using up some of that green space. Again, a concept, but keeping in mind the decisions we make today and the decisions we make with aquatics, the decisions we make with the second sheet of ice will have bearing on one another, depending on, and that's without getting into too much detail on exactly what the aquatic facility would look like, whether it's a 500 seat, 1,000 or 1,500 seat arena. It's just plainly the adaptability and the efficiencies and budget that go into it, that if you're building a multi-purpose facility, the ideal situation is to build one lobby, one reception area, and allow staff to migrate throughout the facility besides the public to migrate. So those are some of the concepts and ideas that they've driven, and we've provided information and some contacts. We actually do have a little bit of a layout and a little bit of a budget, what different facilities would look like. And I think that just arrives at where we're at right now with coming to council and saying that as this group moves forward deeper into stages 4 and 5 of the terms of reference, that it's likely a healthy time to, and my understanding is the timing kind of like Spencer had talked about, lines up with bringing this group in to work together and or with engaging both parallel. We can probably do a lot of the work at the same time because the location, design, and budget functionality are very much going to be tied together, especially if we're looking at the same site. Spencer, did I miss anything? Anything else you would like to add?
No, I think that captures the entirety of the item. And I guess we could just wrap up by mentioning that the recommended motion before council would be to approve the terms of reference by resolution. And if there were to be any amendments, I might suggest I had captured in the brief staff report attached to the terms of reference that because this was largely a working group developed document, it might be nice to, if there are any desired amendments from council's perspective, to allow the working group to have a look at those amendments before any final decisions from council were to be made, if there are any desires for changes to the document. Other than that, that concludes my portion of the discussion. So as always, happy to answer any questions council may have.
Okay, thank you, Spencer and Russ. And I think that this is really good work and informative. And I think people can take a lot of comfort knowing that both conversations are happening in parallel, that one amenity isn't being neglected over another. So that should give comfort to the community that both the discussions are not lost and they're being held in tandem. So, and I like all the work that the group did on the terms of reference myself. I don't have any changes that I recommend, but I'll open it up to council. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Worship, and echo your comments about the well-roundedness of the terms of reference here, which I do support. Just a few things, Spencer and Russ, with regards to this working group. The terms of reference really fall nicely within the scope of the Recreation Master Plan that was approved as a document back in, I think it was 2009. And it speaks to a number of these points here, which leads to my next point, and that is the name of your committee. I thought with the arena part, would have been the arena enhancement working group, and then adding the pool in is a great idea. I just wondered if the title of the working group should reflect a more of a different, more rounded focus. And my third point would be with the money that the county is supplying the town for recreation of $91,000 a year. I would certainly like to include a county member, whether at large or otherwise, as approved by the county council, to sit on this working group. And I'd be happy to hear some discussion on that.
Spencer or Russ, did you have any input from the working group on whether the membership of the group needed to be expanded to, as Councillor Chapman indicated, or?
Yeah, no, I was, so thank you, Mayor. It's just, I'm in agreement with both those. I don't think there's a problem with either one of those suggestions. I was actually just writing them down. Certainly, we just didn't want to get out in front of this without council's approval and support on this. But certainly we can massage the name a little bit to include if we move forward this direction. And then by all means, if there is a county rep, I believe that is always a good idea to tie in as many of the partners as we possibly can. So I don't see a problem with that either.
Good. Any other, Councillor Chapman?
If there aren't, I just make a motion to approve the terms of reference as recommended, and to include a county member into that group.
So Spencer, taking into account your earlier comments, would that be something that we should approve in principle and then get the thoughts of the working group and then come back, or it's just be mindful of their participation and engagement so far, or is that something that would be acceptable? I don't want to rankle any feathers, as you kind of indicated earlier.
Well, thank you, Mayor, for the comments. I think by nature of my role and admittedly my personality, I'm more cautious than not. So I might lean towards the idea of having approval in principle and then allowing the group to consider that. They may have additional ideas outside of what's been discussed this evening that might also add to the discussion and the breadth of work that's going to be done. So if that suits to council's needs, that would be my suggestion. So
would you accept that as friendly, Councillor Chapman, that approval of the amended terms of reference in principle, and for it to be brought back to another subsequent council meeting for ratification?
Yes, I'd like to accept that way, those terms, and just to be mindful that the county is a big partner and in terms of funding as well as participation in our communities. So the working group may want to review that idea.
Okay, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. One thing to note is with the men's league, that does have county members in it. So I do think we're actually getting, I don't know who's representing them from those men's leagues, but I do know on a lot of those, there's county members. So I think in that way you are getting a county representation because you're getting from that group itself, right?
And I think that's right. And, I think one of the key elements is, being on council for a little while, like I have been, I've always noticed that the county does appreciate having some inclusiveness, because some communities are quite eager to spend money and then ask the county for support and financially of something that they didn't have any involvement or engagement or thought of happening. So I do agree with Councillor Chapman that finding this a respectful way to keep the Lethbridge County up to date on what we're proposing in the future so that we, there's no no surprises kind of thing. That's probably a better idea than not. So we have a motion as amended by Councillor Chapman. Any other discussion? All right, looks like we're ready to call the question. So the motion's to approve in principle the amended terms of reference and direction to bring those back to a subsequent council meeting for ratification by Councillor Chapman. Call the question, all in favor? And that's unanimous. Councillor Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls are in favor. Thank you, gentlemen. And now we have Spencer on 7.2, Alberta Health Services, Healthy Communities by Design.
Okay, thank you again, Mayor. So this item has been brought forward by the Alberta Health Services South Zone Healthy Community by Design subcommittee, which is made up entirely of staff representatives, doctors, researchers, and managers, and other types of perspectives brought into that discussion. Essentially, what's being brought forward is a request for the town to participate in the piloting of a new tool that's meant to capture the perspectives of community members from all different aspects of the community. So that may be different age cohorts, it may be schools, business owners, people that work in government, RCMP, and protective services employees, and community stakeholders at large. And the tool is intended to capture what community members think of how the community is built, how the built form works in terms of promoting activities such as walking and cycling, and being able to get around town without necessarily having to choose only one mode of travel all of the time, that type of discussion. So there's no tangible capital requests coming from this group. It's more of a request for a piloting of a research tool to be used to see how health outcomes are being impacted positively or negatively by how communities such as Coaldale are laid out, and if there are any incremental changes that can be made to how the built environment is formed and how policy helps to form the environment in a way that promotes positive public health outcomes. I should note that there's no financial impact expected at this time. As the South Committee Chair has indicated, there is approximately $4,000 in funding available from Alberta Health Services. The particular project team has that funds available to help action this request should council find it something that we'd be able to support and participate in. And I'll just briefly mention on the back end of the discussion that, or the presentation, that the reason this is coming forward is after about 6 months worth of informal discussions between town staff, including myself and our municipal planning intern and Alberta Health Services representatives from this South Zone subcommittee, they had finally indicated that they would like to work with Coaldale as a pilot community for the purposes outlined in their letter. That concludes the comments I have at this time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Okay, thank you, Spencer. I just have two. One is, so you're affirming that you don't think that this is an untoward burden on staff resources and time to be a part of the pilot?
Thank you for the question, Mayor. I don't believe it would be, no.
And then just as a thought, like on the weekend, I noticed a great participation along the pathway system in Coaldale. And so I was just wondering if there's any ability, or do you know of any way of having an actual counter methodology for that? Because I think that'd be helpful for the study to know, how many people are actually, the usage of the pathways and that. Because it seemed, just by anecdotal eyewitness account, it seemed that the tremendous use of the pathway system, but it's always nice to have a tangible physical way of knowing what kind of usage is out there. Is there those kind of tools available?
Certainly, thank you for the question. My understanding is that there are fairly non-technical ways of going about that, doing peak hour counts, or pardon me, expected peak hour counts. So going out on evenings and weekends and actually doing a physical count. And there are also more technical options available in the form of infrared cameras that don't collect any personal information, don't take any imagery of any of the participants that would be using the pathways, but just count the number of effectively warm bodies that would be on the path at any one time. So there are there are a variety of tools to do that type of work. And I do agree that that would be interesting and likely important at some point to know what exactly the usership does look like.
Thanks, Spencer. And I'll open the floor to the council if they have any thoughts or questions. So we have a recommendation to approve the request for the town's participation in the pilot project, which I would support if anybody cares to. Councilor Simpson makes that motion to adopt the recommendation. Any discussion? I see none. Call the question. All in favor? And that's 7 in favor. Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls. No opposed. Thank you. And then we have a 7.3 mountain bike park, a draft public participation plan. And Leah and Melanie, I think, are going to relieve, or maybe even Spencer is going to be a part of this one as well. So whoever wants to take over, go ahead, Spencer, if you're up.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I had let Leah and Mel know that I would take this one for the team and do the talking because they had done the majority of the good work that went into the document itself. So I thought I'd bring up the last bit of the work on this one and present it this evening. There's really not too much to tell other than this keeps our approach to public participation consistent with bringing a draft public participation plan forward for council's consideration on projects such as this. So I would like to highlight that effectively, if we can, Lana, if we could go to, my apologies for not knowing the number off the top of my head, but page, let me see here, 135 of the agenda. And I don't believe it has it would be page 8 of the item itself, but it's a blue and white table that outlines the draft participation plan. And really what it's based around is a fairly conventional story arc when it comes to public participation, which is to take phase 1 and build knowledge, share information, and then see if there are particular individuals in the community interested in participating in a more frequent, deeper types of discussions, such as is the case with working groups and design committees and things of that nature. So that would be phase 1. Phase 2 is taking a lot of that work that possibly could be done by that type of group if this participation plan is to be supported, and then bringing that type of knowledge into a phase 3, which is sharing the draft designs that type of group might come up with, or some ideas that type of group might come up with, finished off with getting information back out to the community for a final round of discussion in terms of what the ideal looks like for this mountain bike park before the shovels hit the ground. I do have to say that without having a solid participation plan in place, we've already had half a dozen inquiries to myself and Russ and a few other staff members from interested community members, ranging all the way from school-age children right up to adults who are passionate about mountain biking and biking in general, who have indicated if there is an opportunity to have a spot on a working group or a design committee, they would be more than excited to participate in that type of role. So the anticipation for that type of work is fairly high in this particular case, and that's exciting. That's good to see. Sometimes it can be difficult to garner additional interest for folks to sit around a table and dedicate evenings and weekends to this type of work, but I don't believe that that will be an issue at all with this project, should council wish to approve the participation plan as presented. That concludes my comments on this item, and I'm happy to take any questions that council may have.
Well, what I don't know this if there's actually a timeline for, or a Gantt chart for, or whatever you want to refer to, on how this comes together, and then, you know, this happens and then the project is physically underway. Is there a thought around that?
Oh, certainly. Thank you for the question, Mayor. There wasn't a specific timeline paired with the participation plan, with the understanding that the goal would be, as has already been indicated in other information released by the town, to have this hopefully be able to be completed, the design phase be completed this spring, and then be able to have the construction of the park this year sometime.
I'll open it up for questions of council through the Spencer. Councillor Home.
Thank you, Worship. Through dispenser, can you remind me what budget we put forward for this project for 21-22?
Well, thanks for the question, Councillor Holmes. Through the chair, may I ask just for clarification for the public participation portion or the project overall?
I think for the project overall, just to make sure we kind of have that on the table.
Okay, I might reach out to our CAO or our CFO for additional clarity, just so we get the exact number right.
Go ahead, CEO Hastings.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excellent question. The exact budget for the project hasn't been determined yet. What we're hoping to do is put out an RFP for a designer, figure out what we can get for what cost, develop some options, and then ultimately take those options to council for final approval. The business model, though, for whichever option is selected, is that the cash from the sale of the Owl's Nest campground lands would be the cash that council would use to pay for whichever amenity option that's ultimately chosen for the bike park. Based on some of our preliminary research, looking at what other communities have done in similar sized areas, you get a range from $200,000 to $400,000, and that fits within the portion of sale proceeds that we would need to use if something in that range were ultimately possible for that area in town.
Okay. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I know the word around town has been very positive about this project. I'm glad to hear so many people are already on board. I know many people that would love to be part of this. So with that, I'll make a motion to approve the request to initiate the public participation plan without amendments. Sorry.
Okay. So we have a motion by Councillor Simpson to approve the participation plan as presented. Any discussion? I don't see any. All in favor? Okay, and that's 7 hands in favor. Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Paul's in favor. That's unanimous. And Spencer, 7.4.
Thank you, Mayor. For this one, I actually am going to pass it off to Mel, who has been working closely with the accessibility working group up to this point. So I'll sign off for the moment and pass it off to her.
Welcome, Mel.
Thank you. Thanks, Spencer. So I'll just provide a little bit of a recap on the accessibility working group. In the fall of 2020, Council approved the formation of an accessibility working group. The group consists of 3 public members, all of which are individuals that identify with living with a disability. In recent months, the working group and planning staff members have drafted a terms of reference that reflects the group's objectives. The terms of reference includes a clear description of the group's vision, mission, and scope to achieve a more accessible Coaldale. An overlying aim of this initiative is to ensure that the process is community-led and that staff assumes a supportive role. The terms of reference maps out a straightforward process for the upcoming year and an ambitious timeline to ensure the group maintains momentum. Currently, the working group meets on a bi-weekly basis to discuss accessibility topics in Coaldale and the group's work schedule for future meetings. The working group's experience is invaluable. The members are passionate about their community and will seek to identify where difficult to access parts of the community are and how they can benefit from becoming more easily accessible for all community members. By actioning the terms of reference, the potential outcomes will benefit individuals with disabilities. However, the benefits are just as significant for other demographics within Coaldale, such as youth and seniors. The working group's next steps, should the terms of reference be approved, will include moving forward and initiating the work plan identified within it. And it is staff's recommendation that council approve the terms of reference. And those are all the comments I have.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Any questions or comments or to Melanie on the presentation? Councillor Chapman? Oh, you're got on mute. Sorry. Councillor Chapman, you're muted still.
Okay, we'll try that again. Thank you, Worship, and thank you for your patience. And Melanie, I appreciate and Spencer, thank you so much for this report. Speaking in favor of it, just a quick question to you with regards to terms of reference. Will the group be looking at all locations in Coaldale that would be either both public and private, I guess, just for accessibility points?
Thank you for your question. Through the mayor to Councillor Chapman, the accessibility audit that will be taking place will include public buildings as well as exterior paths of travel and amenities. We're not yet at a point that we're going to be looking at private businesses. However, one of the members has suggested that we start a business sticker sort of program so that businesses themselves can identify themselves as accessible.
Okay, thank you. Just one further thought with this regards to this. Is this something that the Chamber of Commerce should be aware of?
Through the mayor to Councillor Chapman, do you mean specifically with the private businesses in the sticker program?
I think just accessibility overall as an overarching review of the town, and regardless of where you're at, that, it might be something that everybody will want to embrace.
Most definitely. We have not yet created a public participation plan that is yet to go forward to council. However, we would want to include the Chamber of Commerce as a key stakeholder within this project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. And so we could entertain a motion to approve the terms of reference for this group then as presented. Councillor White makes that motion. Is there any discussion? I see none. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that 7 hands in favor. Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls are in favor. Nobody opposed. Thank you very much, Melanie. Then we have 8.1, the annual intermunicipal financial comparative analytics report 2020, and Cam Mills, I think, will be presenting. And there he is. Welcome, Cam.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for having me, Mayor, Council. Is my volume, is everything good? Okay, thank you. So yes, as you know, it's my pleasure to provide this report. It's a comparative analytics report. Takes a look at some financial measures and some growth measures and what have you from sort of a comparative perspective with respect to other municipalities. Staff report's been provided to council. There's also a presentation which I'm going to lead council through right now. So if you'll just forgive me for 2 seconds while I bumble through it, I'm just going to share my screen. And let's see. Okay. And okay, well, for whatever reason, that doesn't seem to want to go into presentation mode, but I'll just do it from here. So again, as you know, in December of 2019, we presented what was our first comparative analysis. And at that time, we had determined in the lead up to that time that as an organization, we wanted to go above and beyond what other municipalities were doing in terms of analyzing our operation and also in terms of communicating that information to the public. And we wanted to borrow a technique perhaps more common in the private sector in order to do that. So we determined that we would use available information published by ourselves, by other municipalities, by the province, as well as the federal government in order to compare our operation to other similarly sized municipalities in the province, as well as Lethbridge, Lethbridge County as our closest neighbors. And the presentation here that you're seeing provides council with a look at that analysis and ultimately will be used to prepare a report that will be available to the public that looks at our operation from a number of perspectives. So the purpose of this benchmarking exercise is it's to move away from only analyzing our current performance compared to previous years, which is what is standard in the municipal government world, and instead to look at our organization through the lens of how we stack up to our peers. So we provide the report a number of statistics that should help council, staff, residents, business owners, and anyone else who's interested to get a better sense of how the operation is ultimately run. None of the statistics in and of themselves provide 100% clarity on any particular issue and shouldn't be taken that way. For example, every municipality provides slightly different service levels or faces their own unique challenges or circumstances. We do believe, however, that on an aggregate, the information that's provided is a good snapshot of how we're approaching our governance of the town. We look at the same municipalities every year. We selected 6 municipalities that are similar in size. And then we also look at Lethbridge County and Lethbridge because they're our direct neighbors. Now, some statistics that we look at are probably more relevant based on municipality size. So looking at those other municipalities that are similarly sized. So for example, when we look at operating expenditures, comparing Coaldale to Lethbridge is perhaps not super useful. Whereas other statistics are arguably more important on a regional basis. For example, mill rate. It's important that our mill rates are competitive relative to other municipalities in the area. So generally speaking, our approach with respect to all of this is that the 2 most important municipalities with respect to the report are generally Tabor, which I would qualify as our nearest competitor, and Blackfalds, which is our closest comparable in terms of they're also a town of about 10,000 on the edge of a city of about 100,000. So they're very similar to us in that respect. Now, in order to avoid being seen as cherry picking statistics, because we do this every year, we think it's important that we remain as consistent as possible in terms of what we look at year over year. So in our previous report, we looked at 4 benchmarks: operational expenditures and revenues, taxation assessment and information, assessment growth over a period of time, and population growth over a period of time. And then when we're looking at changes from the previous year, so as I've mentioned, this is year 2 of the report. It's a little bit delayed because of a number of other municipalities were delayed in improving their financials, largely due to pandemic issues. And so that pushed our timeline out from December. And we've made 2 types of changes, some where we've learned lessons from previous years, and feel a new approach is better moving forward. And second, we've added an additional benchmark specific to compensation that we believe addresses some common concerns raised in the community in various forums. So taking a look at the statistics from our first benchmark. So this is looking at operational expenditures in those audited 2019 financial statements. So the table provides information on all municipalities with respect to total annual operating expense as identified in their most recent financial statements. And then also provides that data on a per capita calculation. And that's to provide a clearer comparison for the reader. And within that expense, we also consider salaries, wages, and benefits in particular, which is a line item within those financial statements that's common to all municipal financial statements. And again, we break that out on a per capita basis. And finally, we look at total revenue. So the opposite side, on the revenue side, consider the money the municipality brings in from its various sources, taxations, fees, other sources. And then we also provide a sense of that revenue on a per capita basis. There's a lot of information clearly in this table. It's all important. There are a number of interesting items from this page that I think warrant further attention. First, Coaldale within the peer group is the lowest spending municipality in terms of operating spending on a per capita basis. We also have the lowest total revenue on that same basis. So this provides, I think, some clarity with respect to whether the town is being operated as sort of a high revenue, high spend organization or a low revenue, low spend organization. Clearly, Coaldale is operating with lower revenues and lower expenditures within that spectrum relative to our peers. So that's an important consideration because it's oftentimes you might hear folks say, well, it seems like we spend a lot. Relative to other municipalities, Coaldale does not spend a great deal of money. Second, the salaries, wages, benefits column in particular, it's important. It's an issue that's consistently raised in the public in terms of a source of spending concern. And it's a substantial line item as one particular item, obviously, within a broader operating budget. Now, in terms of how Coaldale stacks up, again, we are the lowest spending in terms of salaries and wages. And in fact, Coaldale on a per capita basis is 10% lower than the second lowest municipality. So the second lowest municipality in this case is Innisfail, who spends $781 per person on salaries and wages. Coaldale, by comparison, is $659. That compares to values as high as $1,775 in Lethbridge or $1,311 in Taber. So again, that's another item where clearly it follows that line of, this is an organization that's looking to spend less relative to its peers. Within that same benchmark, we break down the information in a few different ways. So we also look at the information as expenditures as a percentage of revenue. So if we're looking at total operating expenses as a percentage of total revenue, so how does that look? In this case, Coaldale is in approximately the middle of the pack at 83% operating expenses as a percentage of total revenue. And this is largely due to the fact that, with the way percentages work in denominators with the lowest revenue, obviously that drives up the value a little bit. So we come in approximately middle of the pack relative to our peers by this metric. When you look at salaries, what we've done is we compared salaries as a percentage of tax revenue. So in the previous iteration of this report, we looked at salaries as a percentage of total revenue. We're switching here to a percentage of tax revenue. And the reason for that is that salaries as a whole, as an expense, are relatively consistent year over year. You're not going to see tremendous fluctuation in salary. You're not going to see 40% up or 40% down or anything like that on your salaries. And that's also generally true of tax revenue. Total revenue has some items in it like land sales and other revenues that you can have one year that's substantially higher than others. And so for that reason, it doesn't really make sense as a matter of course to sort of tie salaries, which don't really vary that much, to something that varies substantially. So we've converted to looking at salaries as a percentage of tax revenue. So again, on this basis, even considering our lower tax revenues, you can see that we're near the bottom of the pack, with only Lethbridge County in this case being lower at 59% to our 67%. So the second benchmark is about taxation and assessment. So assessment is, of course, what is the value of properties in the town. Taxation, the mill rate, is the rate that's used and applied against that assessment value in order to generate taxes. So we consider within this information residential and non-residential assessment. Non-residential assessment being land and building value of industrial and commercial properties, as well as total assessment, which is actually those two numbers plus some other things that aren't included in their farmland values and things like that, which we don't consider because they're relatively minor items. Then obviously we look at mill rates. We have a residential mill rate, a non-residential mill rate. We take a look at net taxes available for municipal purposes. So those are all of the tax revenue generated within these financial statements. And then again, provide that on a per capita basis to see how the municipality compares sort of in terms of dollars relative to people. And generally speaking, the municipality's services are applied to people, and that's why there's some benefit in looking at that. We break that down a little bit. We'll take a look specifically at the residential and non-residential side. So when we're looking at the mill rate specifically, so we look at the comparative residential mill rate, and we look at this over a 4-year period, which of course, lines up with the council term, 4 years. Now, in this particular case, because we're looking at the audited 2019 financials, it obviously doesn't align perfectly, but because we're going to be doing this every year, we think 4 years is going to be something we want to do consistently. On the residential side, you'll note in the right hand, the column with the sort of orange coloring at the top, where we stood in 2017, I think is particularly important. Out of 9 municipalities, we were 9th, in the sense that our mill rate was the highest of the group in our residential mill rate at that point. This is largely due to the town's reliance on residential taxes relative to non-residential taxes to fund its operations, which is obviously something we've been addressing through industrial development and land sales over the past few years in an effort to shift that tax burden away from our residents. But the good news here, of course, is that over the course of this period, we've actually moved from 9th all the way to 6th. So we've got a mill rate reduction over this 4-year period of 0.65%. And council, again, should note that on average, residential mill rates in the group increased over the same period by 7.15%. Coaldale is not only the best performer by this metric over this 4-year period, it's also the only municipality that saw a mill rate decrease. Now, again, this is mill rate. It's impacted a little bit by property value fluctuations, so it's not sort of completely reflective of something we have control over. However, property valuation fluctuations within Alberta don't vary that drastically from one region to another, other than sort of during oil period booms. And certainly the variation between, say, property valuations in Coaldale versus, say, Taber and Lethbridge is not going to be substantial. So it does provide a snapshot, I think, pretty clearly of the fact that a commitment to taxes staying low and maintaining a lower mill rate and working towards a lower mill rate has been a focus over 4 years and has largely been achieved. Now, taking a look at the non-residential side. So on the non-residential side, so this is industry. This is, properties in the industrial park, commercial businesses, downtown, highway commercial, all of that. You can see here that Coaldale is in the middle of the pack in terms of the overall group, with the note that we're lower than those municipalities with which we are directly competing on from a business attraction perspective. So our direct competitors are realistically Lethbridge and Taber in terms of being other urban municipalities that have available space for these types of businesses. You'll also note that 4 municipalities in this chart have an asterisk next to their name. Taber, Innisfail, Drumheller, and Lethbridge County have an asterisk. The reason for that is that these tax rates are applied only to the value of the land and the value of the building. Those 4 municipalities also have a machinery and equipment tax. Our machinery and equipment tax is 0. These municipalities also tax those values, and that's not included in this information. This is simply analyzing the non-residential mill rate, and so I felt that it was important to draw attention to that. So again, I think what we're seeing here is that Coaldale is performing well in terms of how these rates are trending. So we've got a 0.83% reduction in the mill rate over this 4-year period compared to an average for the group of 4.37%. Only Edson outperforms us by this metric with a 1.02% decrease over that same period. Taking a look at number 3. So this is assessment growth. This is fundamentally about understanding how our asset base is growing in the town using statistics that are published by the province. And by this metric, in terms of overall total growth, you'll see that Coaldale is 3rd. With that said, the only 2 municipalities that have outperformed Coaldale in terms of total asset value growth are Blackfalds and Lethbridge. Blackfalds is substantially larger than Coaldale, and obviously Lethbridge is much more substantially larger. So when we look at that from a per capita perspective, now all of a sudden Coaldale is clearly outpacing the average. And we're also seeing that the value of our assessment growth is outpacing other communities in our region. So if you argue that the reason that assessment growth is growing is because of broader economic trends, if that were true, we wouldn't be seeing growth relative to our peers that are 5 minutes away. So what we're seeing is here clearly, Coaldale is outperforming. And in fact, on a per capita basis, we're outperforming the number 2 municipality by 20%. So that's pretty substantial, I think. Next is population growth. So benchmark number 4 is population growth. And we use, again, these numbers. Our official population isn't registered as 8,896, for example. These numbers, again, they come from the province, and the province provides annual population numbers that are based on, reasonable statistical estimates that they do, that we rely on. And these are important because this information, especially breaking things down per capita, wouldn't work if we were using data that was 3, 4, 5 years old, or if we were using updated municipal information and comparing that to another municipality that was using the 3 or 4-year-old federal information. So we rely on this provincial estimate. Is the population exactly 8,896? Probably not, but it's going to be very close, and it's going to be very close for all of these municipalities. So from a comparative perspective, we feel like it's robust enough for the sense of this estimate. So population growth generally is seen as desirable. It reflects the health and attractiveness of the community, particularly relative to peers in the region. And again, by this metric, we're pleased to see Coaldale performing well, with only Blackfalds growing at a faster rate than Coaldale. And in fact, Blackfalds growth is amongst the best in the province, if not the best. So the last, this is a new one, benchmark 5, we're titling it as executive compensation. And this is really looking at published information that's provided by every municipality from their financial statements. It provides us with clarity with respect to total compensation, salary, benefits, all the rest of it, for chief administrative officer, mayor, and councillors. We provided the analysis for 2 reasons. First, this is publicly available information that that we publish every year, as does every other municipality. And we think it makes sense to compare our compensation to those with whom we may be competing or comparing to. And second, it's an issue that, again, is commonly raised in public discourse. So we think that, okay, if it's raised in public discourse commonly, why not have a reasonable conversation about it to say, okay, well, how do we really stack up relative to other municipalities? And where do we fall within the spectrum? So we've provided here 2 tables. The first on the left shows simply the total compensation. This is salary plus the cash value of all the benefits paid by the municipality in each of these categories. As you can see, Coaldale's the lowest in terms of chief administrative officer compensation. It's the lowest in terms of mayor compensation, and the third lowest, though functionally tied with the two that are ahead of it in the councillor average compensation metric. So the second table on the right then considers where each of these compensation metrics stacks up relative to an average. And in this case, while we always try to remain consistent by looking at all 9 municipalities, in this case, we removed Lethbridge and Lethbridge County because the scope of the roles, especially when you're talking about Lethbridge, is different. And it's different enough, and the pay in both of those municipalities is quite high. And we feel that if we include them, people could sort of accuse us of, manipulating the average upward in a way that might be considered disingenuous. So for that reason, while we try to remain consistent and stay with all 9, we feel it's more accurate to look at the 7 here. So that's what we've done. By this metric, we see CAO compensation as being 13.6% below the average, the mayor at 13.5% below average, and council at about 6% below average. So on aggregate, what does the information tell us? Well, first, it shows that Coaldale is outperforming in terms of growth and development. And while some of that may be because of factors outside of our direct control, it does line up with a value-focused operational mindset that's designed exactly to promote this kind of growth. Second, clearly, Coaldale has a sort of a challenge the status quo approach in terms of our operations. We know that's true with respect to how we've approached capital projects, but now we can see clearly, too, that that's true with respect to our operations. We're interested in finding new ways to do things that provide for savings in order to be able to maintain service levels while maintaining or keeping our tax rates as low as possible. Third, that running an organization this lean takes effort and sacrifice from all levels of the organization. It's only possible to do successfully if we remain focused on strategic priorities and remain committed to this approach. And lastly, Coaldale needs to continue to communicate this message and realistically communicate it more regularly in order for the public to better understand how Coaldale compares to other municipalities in terms of how the operation is run. From here, we'll clean up this information, make any changes that are directed, and then the purpose is to publish a document both in print and online in order to provide our residents with access to this information. And I'll also note that the document will include analysis of the information as well as clear information with respect to where the supporting statistical information comes from. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions at this point about the information in the report.
Okay, thank you, Kim, for putting all that together, and very informative. Any comments or questions of council? Councillor Lloyd?
Thank you, Your Worship. Cam, I just have a question regarding the comparison with like salaries and wages and that. How many of these communities use a lot of contract? Like, are they all comparable as how much they contract out?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So there's also a line item that includes, and forgive me, I'm just gonna dig up the information. So that is a line item that's available in the budgets as well. And when I look at those, so we can definitely look at that as well. And again, that's why it's important to sort of take a high level approach to this analysis and say, okay, this is one piece of information. What are other pieces of information, in order to sort of pull trends out of them, if you will. Now, if you look at the 2019 information for salaries, wages, and benefits, let's look at Blackfalds and Tabor specifically. Blackfalds being very similar to Coaldale and Tabor being very close to Coaldale, and obviously also the same size. So our salaries, wages, and benefits, we're at 5.8 million. Blackfalds at 9.2, Tabor at 11.5, which has us spending an estimated about $650 per person versus $790 or $1,300. So obviously substantially lower. Now, part of that difference is, for example, that our policing is not included in salaries. In some cases it is. In Tabor's, for example, their policing is in salaries. So that will drive some of that gap. It's not $6 million, but there is some gap there. With that said, with respect to contracted services, so our RCMP contract is in contracted services. Tabor's does not have policing in contract. Our contracted services were 3.7 million. Blackfald's was 4.2 million, and Tabor was 5.5. So even though our policing happens to be in contracted services, it's still, our contracted services is still the lowest. And I think it should also be pointed out that a lot of contracted services spending has to do with capital projects with respect to engineering and legal associated with capital projects. And on a per capita basis, without having run the numbers, I would suggest that no one is doing more capital work than we are right now in terms of, you know, construction and building and things like that. So it's pretty impressive that that number's been kept where it is.
Good question, Councillor Lloyd. Anybody else? Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Cam, for the report. I really love to see the differences from the other communities because a lot of times people do compare us to them. I really take it as a positive note to see the increase on our commercial side because I think that's one thing we really need to see. And I think this shows how competitive we are on the commercial side. And I think that is just a stellar for our CEO and our staff for what a great job they're doing. And the other thing I wanted to comment on is, and I would probably like Kyle to bring this back at a different meeting, is our wages for the mayor and council. I'm not going for a raise for this council term, but I would like to see what it would do for our budget if we started it for the next council term. And so that's something I would like to see because we are low on that end. And I know how many hours we all put in. I think we probably make $1 an hour. So we do it because we love our community and not for the money. But at the same time, I believe the next people, I truly believe they need to be compensated better than what we have.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Simpson. So then, Cam, just a question, like if there were, you know, hypothetically any cynics out there and looking at these numbers, would they have any validation to be cynical about the numbers, or have they been vetted by a third party? Or like, I just want to guard against, you know, somebody, you know, outwardly say, oh gee, well that's the administration put this table together, and how valid are these numbers? Are they, you know, they're true and accurate, and the good adding and subtracting done? And you know, can we reasonably put these numbers in the outward facing public mode and not have them subject to any attack on the credibility of the numbers?
Absolutely, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the question. So none of the numbers are generated by us. And in fact, that's why the report's a little later than I would like it to be. So the information comes from financial statements that municipalities are required to do. They get audited by a third-party auditor, as do we, as you know. Then we take the results of that audit and we send it to the province so that they can check over our work and make sure that we're minding the public purse effectively. So we simply take those published reports, because right now, for example, the town of Coaldale, just like every other town, publishes this information. Every time we release, or every time, you know, Kyle and his team complete the audit, we let people know, we publish it on the website. We'd love for people to read it. And this is what every municipality does. But the problem is, all the audit says is this is what we spent this year, this is what we spent last year, so are we up versus last year? We have no sense of, okay, but was last year good, right? So this is another way of looking at that. But every single piece of information in here, other than the total assessment value for Blackfald's, which is a keystroke error, it comes in at 133 million, it should be 1.3 billion. Other than that, and I'll go through the information and double check everything, obviously, before publishing. But, you know, it either comes from an audited financial statement that has been published audited by a good quality accounting firm, provided to the province's financial people for review, or it comes from the province's published statistical information that they make through Open Alberta, which is a website that the province maintains that has all sorts of information, or it comes from the federal government from Statistics Canada. There's literally nothing in here that's generated by us.
Great, thank you, Cam.
You're welcome.
I think a lot of work went into it, and I certainly appreciate it. And Councillor Simpson, you have another comment?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, this is a great report. Is this going to be on our social media within the week?
Thank you. Yeah, I think so. I would, like I say, I would like to clean it up a little bit. I think with this information, we'll certainly let people know that it's coming. We want to clean it up and put it in a very digestible form, because the purpose of this information is really to make it accessible for as many people as possible. And financial information is not everyone's cup of tea. So we definitely want to make sure that we provide it and lay it out properly and all the rest of that. But if it's not this week, it'll be next week. It'll be right away for sure. Yeah. And it'll be social media channels. It'll be on the website. Obviously, we're going to print out copies of the report, have them at the front. I mean, theoretically, the front counter will be a place where people come again regularly at some point. All the rest of that, like we very much want people to hear this. And just like we want people to read our annual financial statements, just like everything else, we just need to keep giving people access to this information so that they can see it, because we're frankly proud of it, as I think we should be.
Councillor Holm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Cam, just one question on when we have the benchmark, the assessment growth 2015 through 2021.
Sure.
Is that new properties, or is that change in value of existing properties and new properties?
Yeah, it's
Because
both.
if it's okay, because if it's, I'm just looking at the county of Lethbridge and the change in their assessment, there seems somewhat low compared to just looking at what the value of properties have been. But so I guess, is this true assessed value, or is this what the taxation value is? Because for land is quite a bit different.
Yeah, so if you look at the section where we're looking at the growth, so the published values where we show, for example, Coaldale 288,371. That's not the total assessment. That's the difference between total assessment at the end and total assessment at the beginning. But again, this is current properties plus new properties. And so again, we're just presenting this information. We're not manipulating it at all. This is the document that the province publishes it. We're simply making it accessible for folks to understand. So that's why we don't break it out in terms of new properties and existing properties becoming more valuable. But there is value in individuals seeing their property values going up. It's not a negative, certainly. And second of all, Coaldale's variation. So if property values go up by 5% in Coaldale, they're probably up a very similar number in certainly Taber and Lethbridge, and probably Lethbridge County. And the variation in some of the further places is probably not massively different, unless we're in one of those periods of, $300 barrel of oil or what have you. So generally speaking, it still provides us with a sense of, where are we relative to the pack, so to speak.
Great. Any more questions through to Cam? Go ahead, Roger.
Move Cam's report for information. Thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you.
I echo those compliments, and any other questions? Call it a vote. All in favor? Okay, and that's unanimous. Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Falls. Okay, and then we'll move on to 8.2, communication summary report. Leah, Leah.
Hello. Can everyone hear me okay? Am I showing up? Great, thank you. So the purpose of this communications report is to provide council with a summary of the official communications work that's being completed from July to December of 2020. So moving forward, the idea is to produce this report biannually to give council an overview of the volume of the communications work that's been distributed through our many communications channels to inform and engage with residents. This, however, does not capture the more informal or on-the-fly communications work, such as interviews that staff members conduct with media outlets. So seeing as this is the first time this type of report has been presented to council, I would appreciate any input if you have any, or pieces of information that you'd like to see presented in the next report. I've also attached some examples of the work that's been completed for context. However, if that's something that you don't want to see in the future, or don't feel like you need to see in the future, let me know, and that's something I can certainly omit in subsequent reports. So my recommendation is that council receive the summary report for information, and that council provides guidance for future data collection if necessary.
Thank you, Leah. Council, any questions or comments? Councilor Chapman?
Yeah, thank you so much for this great report. Thanks, Your Worship. Just a quick question about social media. And I'm just curious as to how effective some of the services like Twitter are. And I have just, in following some of the Twitter posts from around the world, as per se, that they've been so negative and very lots of disturbing comments nonetheless. So I'm just curious as to how effective some of the social media outlets are, and further to that, some of the comments that I see on outlets such as Facebook regarding various levels of concern. Are you able to not monitor it on a overall basis, but just to address some of the concerns that I see or that we see on pop up on occasionally on Facebook?
So I'll address your first question about the effectiveness of our social media channels. So from the report, you'll see that we do use Facebook more often than Twitter, and I think that is because it is more effective. We have more followers and we get more engagement from that platform. That being said, we do try to use more than one, just because different people might follow different channels, and it's just better to get that information out through different avenues. And for your second question about the comments, are you just asking if we, or why we don't respond to certain comments, or maybe you can provide a little bit more clarity?
Sure. I might just give a really quick example that some people complain, say, for example, about cleaning up along our pathways, you know, that some people aren't picking up after their dogs. That's just one of the most recent ones. And whether your administration or staff are able to pick up on some of those and kind of address them right away so that it doesn't, you know, snowball into a bigger problem.
Mm-hmm. It's not, we've discussed this internally quite a bit, because it's just difficult to manage and balance our staff time with the amount of comments that we do get. We certainly don't have the time to be monitoring our Facebook page consistently enough to be responding as they come in. And I just saw Cam jump in on here. I know he has a lot to say on this, so maybe he wants to jump in.
Thanks, Leah. Yeah, no, to address that question. So with respect to commentary on Facebook, it is something obviously we track. And it does result in either internal communication within the organization. You know, we're constantly communicating from the communications department, talking to our operations team and saying, hey, this is a concern that's been raised and things like that. An example of that, in fact, is recently when we brought forward the proposal to shift the business license payment date out. That largely stemmed from a comment that was made on Facebook. So we do read them. We have moved away from directly engaging on social media. What we found was, if you look back maybe 2 years ago, when I first entered the organization and we were looking at communications, it was almost a full-time job just to respond to comments on Facebook. And we felt that we have these specific channels for people to address concerns, and we want to encourage people to use the correct channels because, again, it comes back to the report I just finished delivering. This is a very expensive way for us to constantly go out and find information. So it's there, it's available, but if people want to directly engage with the town, we have other mediums that are more efficient and more effective at that. And in order to sort of not pay one person a full-time salary to simply engage in social media, and that person wouldn't be an expert on building roads or everything else that they need to talk about. It's just not an effective use of our resources. However, like I say, we do monitor it, absolutely, our own Facebook page and other Facebook pages, and where we see an opportunity to adjust our level of service, we definitely spread that information around.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I appreciate the responses. I know that it's an issue of capacity, and I certainly don't personally expect you to overdo it, so I'd like to make a motion that we accept your report for information.
If I may, just to address, because this is the first time we've done this report, this is something we think it's important. We'd like to do twice a year, just so that everyone can see the volume of communication work that's being done. If there's anything that's not included in this report that you think would be valuable, please include that, and that way we can tailor the report for next time.
So I just have a question regarding, I noticed we have an Instagram account, but we don't use it. Is there a reason why? And if we could maybe start using that. I know a lot of you can just, join your Facebook and your Instagram together.
Yeah, so I think starting out, we just felt a little bit stretched, a little bit thin, just to try to balance all the different social media channels. Instagram is something that we can start looking at moving forward, working with a media consultant that we've contracted for this year. So they'll be able to help us with some of that and take a little bit of the burden off of the internal staff, and being able to contract that out is a little bit better.
And then also with that, I completely agree with taking the comments off or not commenting on it, because it can just end up being a snowfall. Is there a way to add to our posts that if you have concerns regarding this or anything else, please reach out to the appropriate channels? I know I have been tagged in some posts and stuff, and people are like, well, we said something on Facebook. Mm-hmm. And that's not the right way to contact us and talk to us. And I just want to make sure that's as clear as day to people, that the proper channels need to be gone through to talk to us, and that's not through social media comments on posts.
I agree.
I would agree. We always try to put a link that leads people to the correct information, or where they can find the correct information, whether it's a website link or a phone number that they can call. At the very least, we direct them to call the town office and provide that phone number on the Facebook post. So that is something that we are continuously doing, trying to push people to look at the external resources rather than commenting when the information can be found on our website or otherwise.
I apologize for dropping off. Some gremlin crept into the office here and did something, but now we're back. I'm not sure if I missed it in a couple of seconds I was away, but with in totality, our communications has ramped up significantly in this term and over the years. And that the one thing would be interesting would be to have the live stream numbers on there. If there be ability to show how many how the attendance of live streaming is or isn't, and that it's just I know it's probably skewed or not quite accurate in the COVID times, but like I think it'd be useful information moving forward on how much people tune in to the live stream or not. Councillor Hope, you have a comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. The only other thing in the overview, I'm wondering if we shouldn't also have listed there the number of web form submissions that we, as council and the mayor receives directly from the public, just so that we kind of have some idea of what the numbers are as we go through. If we're only going to report twice a year.
Sorry, we kind of cut you off there, Leah. Do you want to respond to either of those two items, or you're okay with that?
No, those are all things we can definitely include for the next report.
I appreciate the work that goes into this and the prior report, because I think it just ups the transparency of what council and administration are doing and lends credibility to the overall organization on our efforts to try and properly disseminate information out there. And so good. Thank you very much for taking the lead on this.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We can, if not, we can entertain a motion to receive this for information. Councillor Lloyd moves. All in favor? Okay, and that's approved unanimously. Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls. Thank you very much, Leah. And then we have correspondence, emergency dispatch services support letter in the package. And is there any comments or concerns or questions on that item? I entertain a motion to receive that for information. Councillor Pauls moves that for information. All in favor? And that's unanimous as well for Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls. Then we have item 11.1, HR culture audit. So that's in the package. It's been released and part of our town webpage content. And Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just don't want to bypass this. I think this is something we need to discuss a little bit. I think the biggest thing is we need to discuss our investigators' criteria, like her and her credentials. She's very well looked up at. She's very well educated in this, and she's very well respected in her thing and in her role as this. And I think that's something we need to make sure that the public is aware of. My other concern coming out of the report is, sorry, I don't have it right in front of me, but it was the comment that some of our staff actually feel the opposite of, they're happy to be working here, but from the comments from certain people within the community, it's bothering them. And I just want to make sure they're being looked after with that. And I want to commend our CAO for doing a great job, and all our management and staff for working well together and making this a great place to work.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. And you make a good point in the fact that, amongst many attributes of the report, I think the most profound finding is that the current workplace culture is very overall positive and trending positively. And the notice of the difference between the shop and other the administrative offices is a little bit of a gap in the morale, let's say, but this on the is trending upwards, and I believe that once COVID resumes and our efforts of our CAO can resume, where the regular staff meetings and breakfasts and, that more interaction between amongst the whole organization can resume properly again, those things can improve. And the fact that we, have, there was a few items that required a little bit of attention that were already in process, so a number of very strong results out of the audit and whatnot. So thank you for bringing that to the attention. Any other comments? Councillor Lloyd?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we can just really be proud of this report and really blow our horn, and just grateful to our staff for what they've done. And I'd like to just agree with both you, Kim, and with Councillor Simpson. We need to just get this out there in as many ways as possible and let the people know that what a great town we really have.
Councillor Simpson?
And with that, I believe we released it on our website, but I don't think we've released it on social media. And that's one thing I think we should. This was something that was requested by a group. And I think this should go out on social media where some of these requests and accusations came from, so that everybody can be aware of them, not just the people that are looking on our website. I think they need to see the full picture, and I think it would be a great idea to put it out right away on social media. I would actually make a motion to receive this and also to place it on social media.
Okay, we have a motion by Councillor Simpson. Any other discussion? I see none. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that's 7 hands in favor. Nobody against. So Lloyd, Craig, Chapman, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls are in favor. Okay, and I believe that brings us to the conclusion of the public portion of tonight's meeting. So I would entertain a motion to go into closed session. And with that, we would take a minute or two for me to arrange the teleconference and then everybody to dial in. So that would commence shortly. So does anybody care to make a motion to go in closed session? Councillor Simpson, all in favor? Okay, and that's unanimous. Lloyd, Craig, Simpson, Holm, Avery, and Pauls, thank you very much. And we'll sign off and leave.